Talk shoes. Recorded live.
This is Kevin and Bill from the Ascension Energy program. This is our community call. The topic today will be how chaos leads to, is a precursor to evolution, and also how you can turn negatives into positives. I came out, fall is a time of cutting away things that are negative. The collapse, financially a lot of times, stock market crashes happen in the fall, banking systems collapses happen in the fall. But it's also a time where people start making different decisions and changing the courses of their lives. A lot of it's about, much like the spring, about throwing stuff away, making decisions career-wise, life-wise, emotionally. And it seems like this October has been a very interesting one in the fact that there's a lot of drama taking place worldwide, and there's also seems to be a lot of drama in people's lives that's a little bit out of the ordinary from what I've seen in the past. And, we have these energy technologies, the bioresonance and the etheric water program, and the main function that they have is basically to accelerate your spiritual evolution. And that process, is not a straight line process. It's not a simple, bar graph that goes up. It's sort of like a series of ups and downs that leads to a higher peak over time. It's much like tracking the price of gold or something, or a commodity. There's ups and downs, there's ebbs and flows. The general tide is either in an uptrend or a downtrend. So hopefully the program's been designed to bring your life into an uptrend. But that does not mean there's not going to be dips along the way. It does not mean that life is not going to be difficult. What it means is it will enable you to see problems as they arrive and to begin to take corrective measures a lot quicker, and give you the emotional, mental, and spiritual strength to take and make the difficult decisions in life that will lead to freedom and liberation. So I look at the personality as a blueprint. So the way our personalities were formed, conditioning by our parents, our environment in which we've grown up with, even the conditioning from previous generations, that's all embedded in the genes, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, our karma or familial history, our race history, the race in which we were born in, has its own kind of karma that comes along with it. So these are all factors that kind of condition our behavior and shape our world, the way we perceive the world. Now, I look at the interventions of the technologies to be about breaking the conditioning patterns. I'm going to relate some of the conditioned patterns that I've had in my own life that have kept me limited, and how I've been able to kind of work through some of this stuff. And I go back to, I grew up out in Long Island, in a town called Port Washington. And, we had during the 70s, basically. And, it was, at that time, it was a lot of war internally within the household. My mother was always at odds with my father. There was always fighting. There was always struggle over, money. Money was always a prime concern. Father was always losing jobs. He wasn't really motivated to work. And my mother would hold the family together. So, then on top of that, she has a drinking problem. My father's becomes over time mentally unbalanced. So you have all these chaotic forces at work. And then, each kid in the family had a different coping mechanism that they developed. I was the wild, rebellious teenager. I was the black sheep of the family. So I kind of always did my own thing. And I never listened to my parents, and I basically was self-directed. Now, I was self-directed with some very bad programming. So, I go out and start making chaos. I go out and start, trying to figure out life from my head, basically. So I have this internal sense of what is right and wrong, and of course I don't want to become like my parents. No kids want to become like their parents in general, unless they, had a positive, upbringing. But so I go out in rebellion. I don't want to be like my father. Everyone said, "Oh, you're like your father," and I said, "No, fuck you. I'm not like my father." And so I would attempt to do the opposite of what he would do. And so when you do the opposite of what you think you need to do, you end up in the same place ultimately when the circle comes around again. And so you begin to accumulate. I began to accumulate these life experiences, and and it was different from what I thought would happen. So I would think about, doing this X, Y, and Z, and then X, Y, and Z never happened. And I said, and then I get frustrated. And so what does a young kid do? He just applies more energy. He doesn't change his plan. He just keeps going forward. Why? He feels he's immortal. He doesn't understand anything about cycles in life. He doesn't understand about wisdom, doesn't understand about real knowledge. He's a blank slate. So I go out there and I just force my will into situations, and I keep blowing up my world. I blow it up in relationships. I had managed to do very well in business, and I was, in a lot of ways, I inherited inherited good and bad from your parents. So I inherited a good work ethic, primarily from my mother. So in a lot of ways, I identify with my mother more than my father. It's kind of ironic how, as you get older, you see the influences, the different influences that you thought weren't there. So I'm going along, and I get my first job. I'm like 15. I'm a caddy, and then I get other jobs. And so, like in high school, I'm working 40 hours a week. I'm going to school. On the sports team, yada yada yada. So basically, I'm in the path of total burnout, because my coping mechanism is to occupy my life to the point where, I don't have to feel anything. I don't have to be with myself. I don't have to feel, and forget about emotions. There were no emotions. There was basically either apathy or catatonic kind of behavior, or there was this wild mess. So I had a kind of like an on-off button. Either I was burning everything up, or I was depressed and didn't know what I wanted to do. So I would flip between these states over time. And I hit a crisis point at like 19 and had a nervous breakdown, okay? So that was the first chance that I got that I actually got to sit still and start to evaluate things. And so, during that crisis point, I started the quest of like figuring out what was going on the inside. So this process of self-examination started very early for me. I began this internal search, and so at that point I wasn't really playing with meditation or any sort of religious system or any of that stuff. I still was, a chronic lapsed Catholic, and my goal in life was to just have a good time. Even at 19, I was still trying to figure out, well, how do I have a good time? How do I find happiness, as I define it? And at that point, it was through pure hedonism. I wanted my impulses to be taken care of. That's what I wanted. They were not getting taken care of, so I wanted impulse, immediate gratification. At the same time, you go into the therapy thing, the psychiatrist, and I go through this whole cycle of doing this and then talking about stuff and nothing happening. And so the one thing I remember from the whole shrink episode period in my life was, well, how does this make you feel? He'd always try to get me to feel my feelings. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't have any feelings. There was really no emotional connection. There was a total disconnection from what was happening in my world and how I felt. And so often feelings would come out of sync with events. So I would have tragedy happening. I remember I was working in a restaurant, and I had this little MG midget that I loved. And, I had drove to the restaurant. I left in the parking lot, went in to pick up my check for work, and I came back, and the car was on fire.